Hi, thank you for joining Making Waves on Purpose. Today on the podcast, it is me being interviewed by Jill Dumain. We are both partners in Fractal CSOs, a bespoke consultancy with 5 partners who come together with about 150 years of experience to support our clients on their sustainability journeys. And it was a really interesting conversation because the 5 of us hold such different experiences and different viewpoints on sustainability. I've worked at the United Nations, African Development Bank, UNDP. I'm now in Buenos Aires, but I've also worked in Africa and Central Asia, the US, PwC, Sodexo, and with a myriad of different clients around the world. Jill, who I spoke to, came from Patagonia, SGS, Blue Sign, Lena, European, IKEA, Jim Hanna, Starbucks, and now Microsoft. And Chad from the construction industry had his own consultancy for a number of years. So really interesting group and mix. And we've got, like you'll see in this conversation, super nonlinear and edges of corporate responsibility thinking that I'm bringing. And then Chad, much more process-oriented engineer focus, but rich discussions. And I was so glad to be joined by Jill. And I think you'll see more of these kind of turn the tables, or even Jill or Chad or Jim or Lena having conversations with some of their contacts or clients on the platform. So super fun conversation, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, Jeff. I'm happy to be here with you today to talk a little bit about your background and how you landed in Fractal CSOs.
So great to be with you, Jill. It's nice to, change roles.
I was just going to say,
Yeah.
Let's the tables here. But, as I've told you before, I've so enjoyed you being part of this initiative, the company that we're building now. And your background is so different than mine, but could you give us a little bit of some of where you were and the bigger influential parts? You've been with companies, you've been with governmental agencies, you've worked abroad. Give us just a little background of how you landed here now.
I think the French, I had a friend when I was at the United Nations who was French, and she said that the French have you eat your socks. It's the literal translation. And the idea is like, it doesn't come easy. I've had a super nonlinear path. I started out, I was the Lake and Nature program at a kids camp for 2,500 kids. And boy, did I learn a lot about how to reach people, usually because I did it poorly with kids. And there's an instant feedback mechanism with children. Right. That tells you when you're doing it wrong, that you don't get with adults because we have filters and we're passive aggressive and all these things. But, 8-year-olds, I remember one day I was talking to a kid and I said something to the group and he wasn't doing what I wanted him to do. Whatever I said to him set him off and he started running. Before I knew, he was 50 yards away and I got 10 kids here and a kid running there. And I'm like, note to self. Bad strategy. And it wasn't very empathetic to the kid. And then I lived in Aspen and I worked in hospitality, which really taught me, oddly enough, skills that got me my job at PwC 10 years later. I did that for a long time. And then I realized that while I loved Aspen, and I still, part of me regrets leaving because it's such a rich lifestyle and I love the mountains. And I talk to my friends who, ski and mountain bike all the time. And, it felt like living on an island. It felt like I was missing part of the story. And so my ex-wife and I joined the Peace Corps, and no surprise, she just hated, we were in our mid-30s at the time, and she didn't like the restrictions that living in Kyrgyzstan placed on her. And I don't blame her.
Aspen to Kyrgyzstan, that's quite a shift.
It was a jump. And I felt like I really flourished and she felt like she couldn't. And I understand that. So we moved to Costa Rica and I went on a path. I got my master's at a United Nations university focused on international development and peace studies. And from there, I got an internship. I was 35, I think, and got an unpaid internship at the Global Compact. At the United Nations, and I turned that into a job. I ended up staying for 4 years with the Compact in various roles and responsibilities, and then went to the African Development Bank, and then My wife got a job. I kind of am a trailing husband too, because my new wife is in development. We met when I was
Right.
working in Chile, and I followed her to Africa, then back to DC, and now I followed her to where I am now in Buenos Aires.
But you've always made the best of that trailing spouse, and that's not easy to do for an expat family. I know that. So
No, it has been a challenge. This where I am now in Buenos Aires has been one of the richest experiences, but also one of the more difficult. She likes to say that it's because I'm getting older, and my resume says that, and the gray hairs say that is absolutely true. Yeah, I'm probably becoming less flexible as I get older. No, I think that's right. I also have changed my desires, which I think is really what, in some ways, what sustainability is all about. And I'm really working a lot now in the space about how our myths and misconceptions about how we think about the space. We say things in business that I think are fascinating. It's not personal, it's just business. That is the worst possible framing it is the most trite saying that we all kind of adhere to, and it has really tragic consequences.
absolutely.
Is really an ugly thing to say, or it is what it is, which robs us of all agency. We somehow we have no agency. And I think there's so many things about the way that we think about the role of business in society and our role in influencing that we need to really rethink.
So with your work with these governmental agencies and then transferring into the heart of the business world with some of the companies that you worked for, how did you juxtapose those two experiences and reconcile, I guess, them?
Well, I'd say that the key skill that I had that made me successful in those spaces was adaptability. That I was able to, if not accept, at least understand the cultures and the way things were done at these organizations. African Development Bank was particularly a difficult challenge because you've got 50 different countries that are clients of the bank, and then you've got another many dozens that are, donors to the bank. And understanding those different cultures and working within them was a fascinating yet laborious task. And so that really taught me and made me much more well aware of culture and how it affects how things are done. And then coming into back to the States, I got a job at Sodexo, food service facility management company, which I had come from hospitality. So I understood food and I understood facility because I actually grew up. My dad's a mechanical contractor. We built our own house when I was a kid. So I grew up with a hammer, and I grew up on a farm. So I grew up literally thinking I was going to be a mechanic or something, because that's really probably my greatest gifts are in my mechanical.
Okay.
I'm most natural with a screwdriver or a hammer or a saw, like by far.
Given your intellectual attributes, I can only imagine how good you are with the mechanical one.
I'm most comfortable. I don't know if I'm best, but in some ways I'm happiest. So yeah, and then I went to PwC, and I got the job at PwC because when I was at the United Nations, Shannon Schuyler, who ran PwC's purpose and inclusion or corporate responsibility efforts for 20 years, she reached out to me one day when I was at the Compact. I picked up the phone and she said, "Oh, thank God there's a person." Because she had gotten the runaround and she couldn't get through. And finally, I said, "Oh, okay, how can I help you?" And she had a very typical problem at the Compact, where like 10 different PwC countries had signed up to the Compact. 3 were non-communicating. 1 was doing it right. 3 others, it was just a mess. And they wanted to consolidate into a single membership. That was not an uncommon thing. But we didn't have a really good way of doing it. Well, I said, "Give me 24 hours. We'll talk tomorrow." And I solved it. And she remembered it. I met her years later at a conference, and she said, "I think I have a job for you." Because she remembered kind of my service instincts. And we talked, and I applied.
Antithesis of it's not personal, it's just business, right?
Yeah, and it's funny, and it was just natural. It wasn't anything special. I had a vague recollection of doing this because it was just another in a series. Like, I come from hospitality. Hospitality is all about being of service. Right. Sadly, a lesson that it seems like much of our American service sector has lost. And then I was at PwC for 11 years and off we came here. But fundamentally, the red thread to all of this for me is that you can't redefine the role of business in society without thinking through the roles that individuals have in society, that civil society organizations have, that government has. And I think like you can't help but see that in the news every day today. You know, universities are struggling with the balance between freedom of speech and expression and anti-Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. It's just a mess. And government has devolved into this tribalistic name-calling exercise. And, you know, businesses have tried to stay above it all. And yet every day, I think that's less of a viable strategy. I think, and I'm not hoping to get into, I had a great conversation with Zeed Klein on another one of my podcasts where he thinks we may be heading towards red companies, blue companies.
Okay.
And there clearly are those in the sense of like Patagonia, you know, and Hobby Lobby and, you know, Chick-fil-A probably wouldn't like me saying that that's a red state company because I'm sure many of their clients are not Republicans, but there does seem to be some of that. But I think most companies take the kind of Michael Jordan approach, which is he was asked to comment on something. He said, Republicans buy shoes too.
Right.
And I think most companies try to take that, but I think every day that is a harder line to walk. And I'd say not only is that a challenge, red state, blue state, I think that's a challenge, democracy, communism, socialism, capitalism, whatever the ism you have. I think companies are more and more expected to have an opinion or at least demonstrate some of their values, identity, and purpose in action.
So kind of what you're saying here, if I can interpret a bit, is these extremities, right? That whether you're a government or a business or maybe even an individual, we're being pushed to these extremes away from the center where, you know, personally, there's things that I probably jump the center line on if you were to ask me here, yet maybe I'm being forced by peer pressure or values-based to these extremes, which isn't really healthy for anybody at that level.
I think that's absolutely right. Like, I think of myself as a libertarian Democrat. Like, do I 90% of the time pull a Democratic lever? Sure. But I also will look closely, and there are plenty. I like Mitt Romney. I like John McCain. I didn't agree with a lot of but I thought they were moral. I thought they wanted the same thing I want. We may have a difference of opinion on how to get there, but we wanted the same things. And I thought that was what the middle was about in America, is that we could agree that we wanted healthy, safe streets and better education and, you know, all of these things. And then it was just a difference of how. Well, now we're rethinking the entire narrative. And there's things with the left, like, as you said, like, I thought defund the police was the epitome of horrible marketing. I like the idea of let's give the police a more specific role and, you know, appropriately fund that role in society and maybe build up other roles in society that might not be, you know, where they should spend their time and energy, like community and whatnot, whatever the ideas behind that. I think that's a healthy conversation. I think defund the police doesn't capture that. And I think, you know, we're seeing that play out right now on college campuses in a very non-nuanced way in a situation where, like, it is really hard to decide what to think about Israel and Gaza. I am horrified by all sides of this.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think I was once at a training for campaigners, and his main thing was think of your end result. What is your end result? And put your actions to meet what you want your end result to be. And I think divesting from Israel that these college kids are asking for is camping out and destroying buildings the way to get there. Probably not.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And for me, that end result is a Palestinian state and an Israeli state. Like, there has to be a two-state solution. I think Hamas did not do themselves any favors in the way that they killed 1,200 people and kidnapped, 300. And I don't think Israel's handling it particularly well either. So it's really difficult to figure out how to manage a situation. And I'm not sure that we're in 1968 anymore, that we should somehow apply the same levers to that. So, but it's complex. And I think the idea that we're going to have simple solutions to these things. And so one of the things I'm really focused on is what is businesses' roles and responsibility in that time? Because this is not just a question of response and relief. It is also about supporting the institutions that we think advance collective and individual flourishing. And I believe that is capitalism, some type of constrained capitalism and stakeholder capitalism, or whatever you want to talk about it. And I think that's largely democratic, institutions as well, although we're seeing the real-time effects of undermining capitalism that China and Russia are taking advantage of and further undermining democratic institutions and connections. So what role does business have in that? Because in my mind, the greatest gifts that business benefits from are free markets and democratic discussion and dialogue. And in their absence, most companies are just going like, yeah, well, this is terrible. You got to take a stand. You got to figure out where you stand on these and how to advance your thinking.
So one thing, I just was in a discussion with somebody about in my former life when Patagonia started working with Walmart. And he asked me, what was the reaction and, with the challenges and issues Walmart has and the extreme of Patagonia. And my response to him was, yeah, okay, they had issues that I couldn't touch, that I was never going to influence, but should I not influence the part I could? And so can we take these big complex issues and still focus in on a part we can influence, even if the chaos around us is so intense? Is there a way that business and sustainability drive it back to where we are sitting today? Even in the chaos of some of these extremities, I guess, that we're talking about, is there a place that we still can center on, not in spite of everything else, but in somehow despite everything else?
Well, I think this is where business, in some ways does it better than the rest. Jane Fraser, CEO of Citi, wrote a letter in the days following October 7th. And her first kind of paragraph was fairly kind of corporate speak of like, this is horrible, blah, blah. But in the second or third paragraph, she really got into it and then said, like, our values are about respect and dialogue and not agreement. We don't have to agree, but we have to be able to listen to each other and talk. And one of the things that I've always thought is, I understand why companies say, we don't talk politics at work. Then they say, bring your whole self to work. Politics are an expression of our identity and our expression of our experiences and our values. And I think if we don't find ways that we can discuss that in corporate boardrooms, at Thanksgiving dinner tables, I have that. I find most holidays I remember were not particularly pleasant experiences because we hadn't developed in my family the ability to have disagreement. My wife and I have very different views on what's happening in the Middle East and how you would solve it. Hopefully we can teach ourselves and our son to be able to have those conversations. So I think there's a real role for that. I also think there's real learning that comes from how governments have done this well or poorly. Your point about like change the things we can, this is kind of like the serenity prayer version of corporate responsibility, right? And I like it. And there's lessons to be learned. World Trade Organization for me is one that stands out. As we invited Russia and China into the club under the philosophy that and belief that if they joined, we would have better ability to bring them into a set of shared values that a globalized marketplace and planet should have. That has not been the case. sadly. So what do we learn from that failed exercise? I don't think it is that everybody goes its own way, which is the kind of nationalistic fervor that is out there right now. But it's also not like, maybe it's trust, but verify quicker.
Or test, right? Like you have this hypothesis and then you usually go into testing and testing that hypothesis.
And it didn't work. So what do we try now? And before we like throw stones at, hyper-nationalism, I always like to remind people Gandhi was a hyper-nationalist. Mm-hmm. He wanted local national economies, didn't want a globalized. So it's not the craziest idea that's ever been floated. Yeah. It's not one that I necessarily agree with. What we have to get to a point is having these discussions without somehow demonizing the idea as the stupidest thing you've ever heard of. I do think that, having said that, we should be able to start to make value judgments that one thing is better than another. And let's start at the extremes. Is America better for the flourishing and independence of its people than the Taliban? Hell yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, we've narrowed the field a little bit. Now let's talk, about, China and Russia and the America. I don't think America gets it right, and maybe not even the best. Maybe it's the Nordics or the Europeans or the Brazilians. I don't know. But to your point, what is our desired outcome, and how can we measure the things that are important to us to tell us if we're meeting those? And I think in America, if our outcome is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I'm giving us a B-, C+ right now. And I think business could do a lot to help us turn that into a B+.
Yeah. So what's missing to get to that B+?
For me, I'm doing a lot of writing on this. It's about values, what I call VIP approach, values, identity, and purpose. I think the idea that purpose, which is, a big movement in the last year, is largely a bumper sticker version of purpose. But I think of purpose as a much broader, what is my purpose? What is my organization's purpose? And it's not something narrow. It's something broad. I want to safeguard capitalism, democracy, and provide a service that meets a real need, and not like a planned obsolescence need or a manufactured need, but rather something aligned to what I think, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Right.
And some of that's esteem. So it can be identity. Like half of the value of an iPhone is in the identity of being part of the Apple community. Sure, it does this. I'm not sure it does all these other things any better than its competitors. But it has an identity. It has a group with it. And that's true of a lot of social media, which I see some great benefits. I also think social media should be really deeply questioned in terms of its value to society. I think it is polarizing conversation, and we built our business models in social media around revenue based on outrage, right?
Okay.
The clicks come from the people spend more time, the more outraged they become. So the algorithms dish them up stuff that's just going to make them insane.
Yeah.
It's polarized our conversation, made them a lot of money. And I would ask companies, like, is that a business model you want to support through your advertising dollars?
Right. Interesting. So let's wrap it up with fractal CSOs. What enticed you to join fractal CSOs versus other opportunities that you've had, and even your own sandbar?
Well, first of all, I've been surprised as I started my own company, Sandbar Solutions, at how isolating being a sole consultant can be. And I really underestimated how much I would miss my team when I left PwC. I had a great team that I loved working with, and we did some really great work together. I missed that. I missed the scrum of that, but also the camaraderie, and joining Fractal helped scratch that itch. I also, as you can see, like I'm not taking a shallow end of the pond approach to corporate responsibility. and I like being surrounded by people who take difference. You've had a different experience. You've worked in different industries. Chad, an engineer, has a very different view. We've got Lena and the European view, and Jim takes a very kind of like what's in it for business impact view. So I kind of at one end of like, not the moral or ethical, but the kind of broadest, deepest end of sustainability thinking. And then there's shades of gray all along. And I really like that because it helps ground me, make sure like I'm not, because I think leading and following requires connectivity. It requires distance between the leader and the follower. So if I get too far ahead of the field, everybody's just going to say he's a crank, which they may say already.
No, I think it's a really good observation that we do complement each other really nicely. We come from very, very different backgrounds in a career setting. And, when one of us goes too far afield in one direction, then we do have this sort of natural web, if you will, that sort of level sets with where we're at.
That's right. And I think we need that. I think we embrace a tension that a lot of organizations don't necessarily embrace. And I think it's Lena who says this, and I shamelessly, plagiaristically quote her or don't quote her, but repeat her all the time, which is, sustainability needs traction and traction requires friction. And I love that concept because we like to think of sustainability as always being a win-win. Always very low. Yeah, no, it's win-win. It's not always. Sometimes not. Exactly. Like this is about managing trade-offs. And sometimes those trade-offs need not be there. There is a way to grow without growing your emissions. It's likely not based on offsets. So let's think this through in a better way. I think you saw this recently. SBTI had their dust up because they haven't done a good job of managing the tension is at the center of their organization and their offering. Well, get your act together, guys. Like this is not a news flash that this is a problem. So get it together, manage it, figure it out, find the center ground. Or if you can't, then say, this is where we're going and why. And people will leave and you'll bring other people in, but at least you've got a reason behind it. But be careful because right now I think they're getting pushed back that this is all because of undue corporate influence.
I mean, another way I've looked at what Lena said too over the years is a healthy tension. And business has tension in it every single day. Sustainability has tension in it every single day. And like you just said, that we've somehow amongst the five of us figured out how to have this healthy tension. If we don't necessarily agree, we have to find a way to talk about it. And I think actually we've been able to do that quite successfully to date.
Well, and I think that serves our clients remarkably well because that is one of the challenges. When you're inside the company, it is so hard to do that and not be seen as you don't get it. You don't, and it polarizes the conversation. I've got Jason J. and Gabrielle Grant's book on my desk here called Breaking Through Gridlock. And one of the reasons we have these gridlocks is we create mental models that protect ourselves and show us as owners of the truth. And so a sustainability expert will say, oh, the C-suite people, they just don't get it. Yeah. Or worse yet, they're kind of immoral. So they're either intellectually deficient or they're morally deficient. That's what we in the space tend to do. And, others who don't believe in this the same way that we do or think about the tensions differently, they just look at us as tree hugger, wackos. And that's a divide that if you can't manage that tension and close that divide and have a conversation about how societal value builds business value and how business value builds societal value, then what are we doing? We're not advancing either.
No, and I think all five of us have had a lot of success in using business to move the meter and moving the meter from a sustainability perspective that still benefits business, which in turn is benefiting society and this kind of chain reaction that you're talking about.
Well, for me, the thing that I love is it's like you came from Patagonia, which is the sweetheart darling of the sustainability space. And yet you talk about how it wasn't easy and how there were still challenges and how we still had tension in the model. We wanted to grow. I love the, don't buy this jacket campaign that everybody talks about.
Right.
That is simultaneously a message to the planet of let's reduce our resources. And it's a brilliant sales and marketing tactic. Like, this is amazing. Like, and that tension being managed and being, capitalized on, I think is so smart. And yet
I'll tell you a little inside story on that. So when we did that ad, it was the brainchild of my boss, Rick Ridgway. And we sat, in these random seating patterns in Patagonia in an open office environment. And we just happened to be sitting next to inventory control at this era of our time. And I remember the guy in charge said, okay, what product are you putting in that ad? I need to make sure we have enough in stock.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. Don't buy this jacket. I bet you they sold them out.
Yeah, man. He was like, tell me when are you going to do which jacket? I need to make sure.
And I think, Rick is an interesting guy here. A lot of people don't know his history, but this is, an accomplished climber and self-avowed dirtbag. Like Amon was, these are not suit and tie wearing Wall Street types.
No.
And so it's really easy to discount their savvy, to think like, no, and Rick, you get him in a conversation and get going and thinking through like how he was able to take these ideas, sift through the world of business that is going to try to discard his ideas and make them successful and come up with that campaign. I think there's an art to that. And if that art can be protected, can be produced and successful at Patagonia, I don't see how that can't be produced and replicated in other places in very different ways. Because Yvonne was a unique thing.
Ways. But I often said my job was to make Yvonne's ideas make business sense. And it's true. I mean, he'd come with things. I'm like, I don't know about that, but let's try it this way. And I felt like whatever I did, I had to be able to defend at a business conference why we did it from a business perspective, not a sustainability.
And maybe there's a conversation happening where a sustainability professional is doing the opposite, taking our business things and making them make sustainability sense. Yep. And it's the same thing. It's just the opposite side of the coin.
Exactly. Where you start and where you need to go.
And there are a set of skills and experiences, most of them learned the hard way, that we, with I think 150 years of collective experience in Fractal. One of the things I like to say is we bumped our knees and, stubbed our toes.
We made a lot of mistakes along the way.
Yeah. Certainly, there are places and spaces that have the direct outline of me in a wall where I tried to plow through and then just splatted, and mostly because in the early days of doing this, I was very kind of idealistic. Like, how could, I'm ashamed to work for a company that does that, okay, well then go work someplace else, dude.
Yeah, right. Move on. Which sometimes is the answer.
That is sometimes the answer, sure.
Well, this has been a super fun discussion that I think we could continue on, and we will continue on and on. But
absolutely.
Thank you for having it with me and letting me turn the tables on you and ask you the questions today.
Absolutely. So great to talk to you, Jill. Have a great day.